This video is about embedding files in Houdini Digital Assets. The reason that you would want to do this is if you're distributing a Houdini Digital Asset to one of your team members and that digital asset relies on a file in your file system somewhere, but you don't want to distribute the digital asset and all the files it relies on. So what you do is you embed that file inside the Houdini Digital Asset. The example we're going to use to demonstrate this is creating an Unreal Engine 4 landscape using a Houdini Digital Asset from OpenStreetMap data. So just one thing to note, this example is not geographically accurate. If you want, in terms of the elevation isn't real world elevation. If you want that, maybe look at DEM files that you can get from NASA or some other sources. There's a prerequisite for this, and that is to install the game development toolset. You need to have at least version 1.204 or later because it has a OSM node opdef fix, which will make more sense to you later. So overview. The first thing we're going to do is get the OpenStreetMap data. Then we're going to generate terrain outlines from that OpenStreetMap data. We're going to create a Houdini Digital Asset, import that asset into Unreal Engine 4, and finally fix a problem in the previous step using embedded files, which is the entire point of this video. So step one, get the OpenStreetMap data. So this is Naples in Long Beach, California. I'm going to just select this island. I don't care if it's truncating anything outside of the island because I'm going to get rid of that in Houdini anyway. So I'm going to export this. It's saved it as map 4. I'm going to rename this to Naples. And I'll come back to that in a moment. Now I'm going to switch to my, go back to my slides. So the next part, we're going to go over to Houdini and generate terrain outlines from the OpenStreetMap data. So that's going to be importing the OSM data, creating polygons of the interesting shapes, and then finally projecting that onto a Heightfield. So switching to a blank Houdini project I have, first thing I'm going to do is just I'm going to use, you don't have to use a project, I'm going to. So I'm going to say new project, just to show kind of like how I normally work. And I'm going to save that project onto my desktop. And under Houdini projects, that's fine. And then this is going to be called my OSM Heightfield. This is going to be the name of my project. So when you create a project, if you haven't done this before, it just creates a bunch of folders for you, and then it allows you to reference things in your project using the job variable. And if you want to find out more about that, you can go look at the project management page in the Houdini documentation, and it talks about how you can reference things using the HIP variable, the job variable, and using projects. So creating that. Now I'm going to save the HIP, and it's going to be inside. You can see I'm using this job variable now. I'm going to call it OSM Heightfield. Doesn't really matter. Now that I have that project, I'm going to move my Naples OSM file that I downloaded. Copy. And I'm going to put it into that project structure. And I'm just going to paste it in the top level. So there it is, just right next to my HIP file. Right. So back to our slides. Let's import the OSM data. So in order to do that, we're going to need to put down a geometry node, dive into it, and put down an OSM import node, which is part of the game development toolset. All right, so we got to give it a file. I'm going to choose one relative to my job variable, and now you can see the Naples file in there. And now you can see the outline of the island and the foundation of a bunch of buildings. It's just all flat 2D right now. Next thing we're going to do is create polygons of interesting shapes. And so to do that, I'm going to basically delete the stuff I don't care about. So use the delete node. And I'm just going to select like this island. I'm just shift selecting in this island. So those three look good. Hit return. I'm going to say delete non-selected. So now I'm just left with the outlines that I'm interested in. Next thing I'm going to do is create polygons of those shapes. So I do that with polyfill. And I'm going to do fill mode single polygon. I'm not really caring about n-gons right now because I'm only going to be using this for Heightfield stuff. Next thing we're going to do is project that onto a Heightfield. So I'll lay down a Heightfield node. Now, whoops, the Heightfield node, it is important that you pick sizes that Unreal Engine likes. And for more information on that, see the landscape technical guide in the Unreal Engine documentation. And you can see they have this recommended landscape sizes, and you do want to follow it, because if you don't, you'll get some weird stretching along the edges of your terrain. So I'm going to be using 2017 by 2017, just because I experimented with this earlier and that size worked well for me. But you have to experiment with what works for you. So one thing that you want to do is, if I look at the info here, you're going to see that the height field's actually 1009 by 1009, and that's because my grid spacing is set to 2. So that needs to be set to 1. And then it's 2017, 2017. Now that's important for when you finally export it, but for now it's not. And so just to save time as far as moving things around with less resolution, we can make this pretty high. So I'm going to make it 16 for now. I'll drop that down before we export it. Right. So what we need to do is, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take these shapes, these polyfill shapes, and project them onto the height field. And so to do that, I'm going to use a mask by object. And the object that I'm going to use is this polyfill mask. So you can see the shapes over there. I kind of want it in the center. It's not really in the right spot. So I'm going to go ahead and put a transform node up here. Let's move it around. And this is one of the reasons why I left the resolution low, because these kind of operations are faster on low resolution data. Okay. Then, yeah, okay, I said that, but now I actually want the high res data. So I'm going to go back to 1. So I actually want to see these crisp outlines for a moment. So what I'm going to do in here is first, in the mask, I'm going to blur it a little bit. Actually, I'm not going to blur it. First, I'll show you why I'm going to blur it by first raising it up so you can see how harsh it looks. So I'm going to raise up the part that's masked using a remap node. And I'm going to say map 0 and 0 to 10 and 10. So it basically maps everything to 10. Now you can see the kind of harsh edge right there. Just looks pretty terrible. And so that's why I was using the blur up here. So the first thing I was doing with the blur was expanding it to begin with. Make it bigger. It's like, say, 4. Just increases the size of the mask area a bit. And then I add another blur node after that to soften everything. So Heightfield mask blur. And yeah, like 10 seems to be nice. That seems fine. So now when you see the remap, it's soft. So just to compare, it's like no blur and blur, no blur and blur. Okay, so that looks pretty good so far. There's no noise or anything, and I'm going to end up putting buildings on this flat area, so I don't want to add any detail there. I just want it to stay flat, but this area here, which is under the water, is too flat, so I'll add some noise to that. So I'm going to drop down a mask by feature node, which seems kind of weird because what I want to do is invert the mask. But what you do is just turn off all the mask by features, use difference, and then say invert mask. So alternatively, you can use Heightfield attribute, or the Heightfield wrangle, sorry. And if you like math or programming, instead you can just say mask equals 1 minus mask to invert your mask. And it does the same thing. Anyway, I'll use this one. So the next thing we'll do is add some noise. Oops, that's attribute noise, wrong kind. I want Heightfield noise. And obviously too much. So let's go ahead and turn the amplitude down to, say, 20, and the element size to 100. Let's see what that looks like. Maybe I'll reduce the amplitude down even further, maybe 10. There, just so it's not flat like everything else, looks a little more natural. Okay. Let's go back to the slides. We did all that. Let's move on to the next part, which is to create a Houdini digital asset. So in order to do that, we're going to select everything in our network. Go to Assets and say New Digital Asset from Selection. All right, so it by default wants to put it in your own directory, which I don't want to do. I want to save it with my project. So I'm going to go to the job variable again. They have a folder called HDA. I'm just going to throw it in here, and I'm going to call it My OSM Island. Maybe I should My OSM Island. Right, a little easier to read. Okay, so just a little bit of housekeeping. I'm going to dive inside of the subnet that got created. And I'm going to add an output node. And that's good practice to do, because if you don't have an output node, the thing that your digital asset outputs is whatever has the display flag. And so while you're debugging stuff, if you set the display flag, say to here, this is what the output of your Houdini digital asset would be. The output node makes sure that regardless of where your display flag is set, it's always used instead. Okay. I thought that I did this already. Accept. Scary. Okay. Do not need to mess with this, so I'm going to go ahead and close the type properties window. We'll come back to that later. All right, now let's import it into Unreal Engine 4. I have a blank project setup that has the Houdini engine plugin for Unreal enabled, and so that's outside of the scope of this thing, but that needs to be here also. So I have this blank map, literally has nothing in it, so let's put some lights in it. It's directional light, skylight. I'll make them both movable so we have total or no baked lighting at all. Save that map. And then let's import the Houdini digital asset we just created. Just on my desktop, under Houdini projects, under that HDA folder, and here it is. So cool, it's in here. Drag it in. See what happens. All right. So we got an error in the console, in the output log. It's a big stack log. Not clear what the heck's happening. What's going on? What's going on? So this is where I'm going to show you a couple things. So why is it silently, I guess it's not silently failing, there was an output log error, but why is it silently failing? And so what we're going to do is fix this HDA using embedded files, the whole point of this video. So first, we're going to open the scene in Houdini. And that's not opening the HIP file that we were authoring the content with to begin with. That's actually opening this scene in Houdini. So if I go to File in Unreal Engine 4, you can see there's this option to open the scene in Houdini. So I'm going to do that. Just 1 second while it's loading. And here it is right here. And if we dive into the subnet, you can see there's an exclamation mark. So what's going on? And the error is, it says failure to cook template geometry, invalid source. So I'm going to keep diving in until I see the first failure. So errors, Heightfield's good. So there's a problem with the OSM import node. What's going on? Click on that. All the way at the very beginning, the very first thing the OSM import node does is read some map data in. If you click on node info here, you'll see it says no such file or directory, and it's trying to read the path to the Naples OSM file, but it's wrong. It's reading C:/Unreal Engine UE 423. It's reading it relative to something else. I used the job variable, which was supposed to be relative to my Houdini project, but now I'm using that Houdini digital asset outside of that Houdini project, so it doesn't work anymore. So what we need to do is embed the OSM file in the Houdini digital asset. So let's go back to our HIP project. I'm going to close this scene. And the way we're going to do that is add the OSM to the extra files section of the property types window. And then we're going to use something called an opdef reference to reference that OSM file inside the Houdini digital asset and then re-import it in UE4. So going back to the project, I'm going to dive into the subnet, and this was the node that was causing the problem. You can see here we're referencing it with the job variable, job/Naples. Does not work. So what we need to do is just right-click on your Houdini digital asset and go to Type Properties, and you'll see a section called Extra Files here. This is where the magic happens. So what we want to do is select the Naples OSM and add that as a file. So now it's in the Houdini digital asset. So great, let's apply that, accept. Then the second thing we need to do is tell the OSM node to use that. So let's use the floating chooser. There's this opdef thing, which supposedly you can use to find stuff. I haven't figured out how to do that. Actually, just bear with me one moment, because I have to actually remember how to get to it. I think that you use something like opdef and then something like this. So that's not right. Let's see how expert I am at this. Just 1 second, I just need to look it up. almost there. There we go. So it's actually like this. All right, it's working now. All right, so the opdef, sorry that took so long. The opdef path is documented here, which is, if you Google referring to embedded asset files using opdef. I guess I could have looked at that. So I'm using this syntax right here with the question mark. So anyway, I'm not going to spend too much time on it, but now it's inside there. So when we save that asset, so we're going to save subnet 1, which is, I didn't name it very nicely, but that's the island. We go back to Unreal Engine, right click and re-import. Well, actually rebuild all instances also. So now it's doing its thing. It's working this time. And there it is. So you can see, this is really big. There's the cutout. It's taking me forever to fly over there. So here's our landscape. All right, so that is pretty much the point of the video right there. If you want to stay on, I'm going to do one more thing, which is add buildings. And this is totally outside of the scope of embedded files. And actually, Luis Cruzel, who works at Houdini, already has a demo of this on Houdini's website. So if you just want to stop watching now, it's fine. You already got everything out of it that I meant to show you. But we are going to do it. So the way I'm going to do that is to use this OSM buildings node. And now this thing just kind of extrudes buildings for you as a convenience, as you can see here. So what I want to do is just kind of call out the buildings that aren't on the island so they're not just floating. And that's pretty much it. So to do that, I need like a bounding box of what's in and what's out. So I'm going to use this polygon that I had before, do a poly extrude. And I'll just extrude it up, say 100, doesn't really matter. So here's my bounding box for buildings that I want in the level. And then actually want the delete node to be after that so that I can transform everything first to the right spot. There we go. All right, I'm also going to end up merging this below with the Heightfield data. Let's just get an idea of what it looks like now. And also realize that we moved that height field up by 10 units, I think, in this remap. So we're going to have to do the same thing with these buildings. So let's move those up by 10 units. See what that looks like. There we go. Okay. So you can see I got all the buildings on the island, but I also have them floating off in the water, and that's what I'm going to use this bounding box for that I made. So this bounding box should contain everything. So, okay, so far so good. So what I want to do is delete everything that's inside that bounding box. So the way I'm going to do that is create a group. Call this one Island Buildings. And I want to use this bounding box option. So I'm going to say bounding object. Now you'll notice it says points or vertices only. So I need to bring that in here. Oops. And it's not going to work right now because you can only do this with points or vertices, so not primitives. So I'm going to change them to vertices. And then to get them back to primitives, I'm going to do a group promote. And then we're going to delete everything in that group that is not selected. Oh, did something wrong. Let's see. Promote from to primitives. We want to promote to primitives. There we go. All right, cool. There we go. Now let's see what the output looks like. All right, so now I only have buildings on the island and not in the water. All right, so this is good for prototyping. It's not going to be great for like an actual game because all of the geometry of the buildings is going to get brought in as a single mesh in Houdini. So it's like no matter what you're looking at, if you see the smallest part of one piece of the mesh, all of them are going to be rendered. All right, so let's save that asset, subnet1. Go back over to Unreal Engine. Build all instances. And there you go. Maybe I'll drop down a, oh, I need some atmospheric fog or something so I can get some light from the sky dome. Just 1 second. Then I'll recapture my skylight. There we go. I can see it a little bit better. And that's pretty much it. So nothing else to show.